I'm not sure if any of you are aware, deaf-blind people, when they fill out like any federal funding form or anything like that, they are required to pick either deaf or blind. They can't pick both. They can't say deaf and blind. So we always encourage deaf blind people to pick blindness over deafness, because there's better funding there for them and better support from the government.
See if I can start this thing this morning, not with my mic muted like I have the previous 2 weeks in a row.
Have a good show, Ms. Thompson.
Thank you.
Oh, your mic's still muted.
Welcome to Office Hours. If you want to find out more about what we do here at Office Hours, you can go to officehours.global. Our first hour is general conversation. Our second hour, we pick a topic to spend a little bit more time on. And today we're going to talk about what we want to talk about in future Saturdays. We've got representatives of both our education and accessibility panels here, and we're going to have a good discussion about what else needs to happen. But right now, let's jump into our questions. Ms. Joel, what's our first question?
Thank you, Laura. First question coming to us from Tlaloc Lopez Waterman in Macon, Georgia now. It was amazing to see that the FDNY, which is the Fire Department New York, is using drones for firefighting operations on a recent crane fire in Manhattan. Do fire and law enforcement groups have to work under the same FAA rules for drones?
Alex?
Yeah, they still have regulations that they need to operate under, but they're not the same as ours. The National Fire Protection Agency, or the National Fire Protection Association, has what they call the Public Safety Drone Program. And so there is a different set of rules and a tight set of drones that they're allowed to use to make that actually happen. So they do have regulations and they do have guidelines and training and certification to use those drones, but it's not the same as the general FAA rules.
Next question.
From Rick Combs in Columbia, Tennessee, someone from Google showed up at our church yesterday and was offering to do a 3D scan of our interior buildings and also use the Google car for our outdoor campus. What are the panel's thoughts?
John Snyder?
I think it's a great idea. And what it will allow you to do is have your building and layout on Google Maps. so that your guests can find exactly where they need to go a lot easier, especially if you offer something like a midweek service in a random classroom. It can be very difficult for guests to find their way around a building, and having a scan of it on the internet will help them find that.
Go ahead, Brandon.
Brendan?
Yeah. So my thinking is it depends on what the church wants. They want, it's a great church. People want to come to it. You want to make yourself known, or you prefer to be more private. I would, if it was my building, I would have Google come. I want people in there to look at it and to see what we do and everything. But for other things, it depends on maybe people's secrecy or privacy if they want it. It depends on how well you want to be known.
Alex, you have something to add?
Yeah, a lot of organizations, especially public ones, will not have Google scan their area if it's anything that's not absolutely public. So they it would be pretty common. They might want to go into the main area there, but they probably wouldn't want you to go anywhere else. So that's like a store or everything else. That's probably all Google wants to do is let you walk into the main area. So I don't think that, but I wouldn't even go up or down or to the side. You walk in the main door, you get into the main sanctuary, and that's all I would have them scan. And most would consider that. I do agree with everyone before that it's a great way for people to get introduced to what you have. So I think it's a good idea to have it scanned. It's just that you just don't want to allow people to plan, so you just want to make sure that you're not providing too much information.
Absolutely. From a security's perspective, that makes so much sense, Alex. Thank you. Next question.
Next question from John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania. Due to MS, multiple sclerosis, my sister can only provide input devices with her voice. I've set up several devices, but I would love to hear suggestions about which software and hardware devices work better for folks like this. Thanks.
Alex?
I think that Apple probably, as far as a hardware platform across iOS and Mac OS and other things, probably has the best solutions that are connected to it right now. Apple spends a lot of time and energy making sure that their devices, especially for voice activation, although voice activation has gotten much better over long things. The other thing to look at is Amazon's. A lot of Amazon's tools. There are skills that you can give to your Amazon voice activated. So I don't want to say the word, but the control device. And you can build skills for it with a web interface. So you can say, I want you to do this when I say this. You can type it in and have it all there, and then it will take on those things. Now, that can be done with Apple shortcuts as well. Skills is another way to do that. But you can really build some complex operations inside of both of those. I've had a lot of success with both of those platforms.
Yeah, and Google's is getting much better as well. Mandy, you wanted to add something?
Yes, plus one to what Alex said about the Apple devices, such as the iPad, iPhone. Voice control is one of those accessibility features that is built in. And what is also helpful there that I have found is that if that's putting a lot of strain on the person's voice and they may need a break from using their voice, you can even add something like switch control into the mix to control the device if dexterity is not an issue, or if dexterity is an issue of doing gestures on the screen, that will actually minimize. You just have to push a button, and there are varying kinds of switches that can be used for a jaw switch or a button.
Mitchell?
I've used most of the main players out there, and I've sort of settled on Google. The only problem I have is I have multiple Google devices around my apartment, and for some reason, when I'm talking somewhere downstairs, the upstairs Google responds. So I can't figure that out. But the good news is one of them will catch it. And if I make a command, it's amazing how softly you can speak, and these things are listening and responding well.
Absolutely. I have had, I'm primarily a Google user when it comes to voice activated. And yes, I do understand what you mean about you say something. I'm in a small apartment, but you say one thing and your phone's next to you and the thing across the room actually answers. I've had that experience myself. Let's go to our next question.
From Burkhard Friedrich in Easterberg, Germany, looking for a cabled solution when connecting Mac audio out as a microphone in on my iPhone 14. What's to consider?
Alex?
I think Mitchell was before me.
I see it.
Yep.
Mitchell, sorry.
I like the iRig devices. They have so many different ones, including a USB input that allow you to use that, and they're inexpensive and simple to operate. So my vote, go to the iRig website and find which one of the many they have would work best for you.
Go ahead, Alex.
There are quite a few options. So you just have to decide how professional you want the connection to be. So at the base, you can you probably will not be able to do a headphone out of the. So if you have the first temptation you'll have is to take the lightning to headset adapter and get a TRS for your computer and plug that into the TRRS of the laptop, but the impedance is different. So, or not the impedance, but the voltage is different. They're not built for the same thing, and it won't work. I mean, it'll come in I would expect it to come in very overmodulated. So taking something, the iRig that Mitchell talked about, you could also take something that is and you may be able to get that to work, by the way, if the headphone to there, if you turn it way, way down, but it's probably not going to work well. The main thing is you want to figure out how to get, again, if you want to go up a little bit, you would get something that is going to take an XLR in and something that'll do an XLR out of the computer. So that can be a pod DI out of your computer. It's a little box that'll take the headphone jack out and turn it into XLR. And then you're going to plug it into some little adapter. iRig has those adapters that can, in fact, you can take an iRig cable and plug it probably into that output and push it into the computer. And there's a couple different ones, but you're looking then for an XLR to headphone jack, which are sold on Amazon for, not very much money. So you can actually make that work. So having a little bit more control on the output there, but a pod DI is probably what you're looking for, the easiest way out. Now, the really complicated way to do it is to get a really proper XLR to, USB to XLR output. I use a very expensive USB Pre 2 is how I get XLR out of my computers, and then you do an XLR back in to that, and that would work well. So you just have to decide, how complicated you want to make it.
Next question.
From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas. Paul wants to know, and have you discuss presenter overlay effects in Mac OS Sonoma? And there's a link to it there.
John Snyder.
Yeah, the presenter overlay effects in Mac are a new feature that allow you to combine your video feed with whatever you're presenting on screen. Specifically, it's designed for things like Keynote so that you can have a cutout of yourself overlaid on top of your Keynote presentation. Microsoft's had a similar thing for Microsoft Teams for a bit more than a year now. And what I've noticed with people who use it is it's very distracting. So unless you have a really good key around the person, so it doesn't cut them off in weird geometric shapes, and unless you design your content to fit around where your body is going to be on the screen, it can be really distracting for people. So just make sure you're designing your presentation or whatever you're sharing with that in mind. Your content should match your delivery. And so make sure that your body is not blocking off some important aspect of your slides, especially. So otherwise, it's even more distracting for your users.
Alex?
Yeah, I would agree. What I always ask people is, how often outside of the weather do you see people use the person kind of cut out over top of the news or over top of and the answer is almost never. So it's, I think that as a design, it's not something that I use very often. I'd much rather do what we would call a picture in picture. So that's me, smaller in a corner or up to the side or popping in as part of the design. I think it's more pleasing to look at than, and actually I think that people who watch broadcast are more used to it. I think that I agree with John that the real problem with a lot of these is that unless your green screen is very, very good, your edges will roll. So you'll see the edges moving all the time. And that creates cognitive load on the far end. We're constantly ignoring those things. Like we're actively ignoring them, in our mind, and that adds weight to what we do. So if we're, so we're saying that doesn't matter, that doesn't matter, that doesn't matter. But it is adding weight to what people are looking at. Having a good video signal that is not something that isn't fully working definitely improves people's experience of that process.
Yeah, and as well, kind of taking this from a visual standpoint for a moment, those edges that Alex talked about for somebody who either has different types of visual impairments. I know with my nystagmus, sometimes if I can tell immediately if somebody's got a image. I mean, now I've seen some really good. I mean, Alex has seen some really good keyed images in this group. But if I'm anywhere else, immediately I can tell if it's a virtual background of some way, shape, or form. And I'm not even epileptic, and I can't imagine with some of those edges how some of the epileptics feel. Next question.
From John Snyder in Reno, Nevada, here in our panel. I'm trying to pull the photo library off of an old Time Machine backup from a different Mac. Time Machine keeps wanting to use the backup image from my current machine. How do I pull the content I need?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah. So, John, can you explain a little bit more of the problem?
Yeah, so I had an old Mac from 5 years ago, and it had my main photos library on the hard drive, and I have a Time Machine backup from that. I got rid of that machine when I upgraded to this Mac Mini, and I've just never gotten around to moving that photo library to this Mac Mini, and all my online backups are either corrupted or broken or something, and so I have some old hard drives I'm going to try pulling from next. But what I tried doing is just going into Time Machine I have a Time Machine backup on a NAS, and just pulling up that old Mac's Time Machine. I just can't seem to get the Time Machine app to connect to that Mac. And you can't just like double click on a Time Machine bundle to see what's inside of it. So I'm just trying to figure out, is there a way to see just that one folder and just pull one item over to a different machine?
Yeah, you have just outlined why I never use Time Machine. So, I always want to have my files somewhere that are not in something that I can't, that are wrapped into something that I can't get to with a general file. And I've had the same problem with Drobos, where the Drobo is, I thought that they were great when I got into them, but they are, some of them are close to failing, and they are very slow, and almost all the files are somewhere else, but there's been a handful of them I've been surprised to find there. And it's wrapped in something where if the Drobo dies, there's no way to get it out, And so I think that I've moved very carefully over to things that generally are easy to unwrap if I need to. But I don't have an answer, because the Time Machine, I have to admit, I just felt was dangerous when I saw it, outside of what was there. But you're outlining exactly the problem that I was afraid of. I've never seen it happen before, but I don't know enough about it. I was just curious if there was more to it. But yeah, it sounds like you. I probably would take it to an Apple store, to be honest.
That doesn't sound promising. I have an extra Mac. I can restore the whole Mac from the Time Machine image.
Well, then I would definitely do that.
Which is, I think, what I have to do. I was hoping for something faster.
No, I would definitely, if you can get it off there, I would restore the whole thing and then pull all the files that you need, and then be done with it. Yeah.
Next question.
From Douglas Carmichael, the U.S. Senate passed the AM for Every Vehicle Act to force automakers to include AM radio reception in cars. Considering the changing media and public safety landscape, Do you think this is appropriate?
John Snyder?
I absolutely do. I've gone traveling outside of the state 3 times this year, and 3 times this year I've needed to listen to AM radio to see what was going on around me because I just didn't even know where to look for local news.
Mitchell?
My opinion differs slightly. I mean, what's next? They're going to mandate that we get 8-track players back in our cars. AM used to be the king of the airwaves. It no longer is. It's not the first choice that people have. And I don't think it's because AM may or may not be in your car. I think it's just an old technology that needs to be updated somehow, maybe making it all digital. And I think they're considering that. I just think that to go to the lowest common denominator as far as your communication method isn't going to fix it. I think FM, HD, streaming, those things make much more sense because that's where most people are residing.
Alex?
Yeah, I'll argue that we just haven't built the infrastructure to move. So I don't necessarily disagree with either John or Mitchell, but I think that we have not built the infrastructure that is necessary to make the move. So we have to figure out, what are we doing with those radio stations? What are we doing? That's an ecosystem that is important because it provides content that, as John said, is not available anywhere else, whether it's talk radio or news radio. Those are things that are still, that's an ecosystem that we don't necessarily want to kill off. And we haven't built the infrastructure to move those stations, that service to everything. So I would say that until whatever we have that's new is moved over and that ecosystem is available in every, 95% of the cars out there, we can't turn that one off. We can't just wipe out the last bit of local news and local discussion and so on and so forth. Without having those stations have to be available in your car. So there's digital, digital opportunities there. They could be much higher audio quality and other things, but that has to be installed in the cars over a decade before you can turn off what people have now. So I think that that's really the challenge, is not losing that entire ecosystem without that. I also think that the FCC needs to start reimbursing people for offset, making decisions that make things obsolete. So the FCC, sells their wavelengths, and then just let everybody deal with it. And I have to admit that was thousands of dollars of cost to me. So I'm very particular about it, which is when they changed the wireless spectrum, a lot of my very expensive transmitters became obsolete. And I think I should be reimbursed for that. They got paid for that. They got paid for changing those wavelengths. So the FCC made billions, and they basically just did it at the cost of probably hundreds of millions at least. Of average people. And so I think that you have a lot of investment in AM. You have a lot of people who have businesses that work around it, like local business. That's the only real place to advertise outside of Facebook, and it's really, really an important ecosystem, not just for the content, but for the whole ecosystem of local business. And so I don't think that we should, I think that we have to be very, very careful of removing it.
Yes. Alex, quick question before we move to John. Which goes further? Does AM or FM actually go further
AM.
and more useful in an emergency?
AM will travel further, especially at night. So it depends on what time of day, but AM will generally travel further than FM, and then of course the longest is shortwave.
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, I'm wondering, because the way my main use case for this is I'm driving usually through mountains and I need to understand what's happening on the roads. How does the government make any sort of emergency notifications accessible for those, especially who aren't able to hear the radio?
I don't
think they have to hear. You have to have those you have to have radio to get it. To get it's put across everything now. Some of the emergency, like Amber Alerts, go across every cell phone. Which is crazy. I was recently had an Amber Alert go off when we were in North Carolina, and there's 20 people in the room, and suddenly the whole room lit up, on an Amber Alert, which I think is great. I think that's a really great service.
Brendan, you wanted to weigh in on this?
Yes, that's exactly the point. Accessibility. And so thank you. I think that if the government makes a large investment of money for that sort of thing, if they're talking about what they're going to do with AM frequency, they have to figure out, how would you figure out to do, captioning, or how would you make that investment, accessible to everyone? How would you improve the technology? So, I know there's a lot of talk shows, talk radio on AM frequencies, but, this is new technology. So it's an opportunity, right, to add more, better, more advanced technology instead of just AM is only accessible for hearing people. To your point, what do the people do that can't hear that information, that emergency information? So thank you.
Absolutely. And that's the power of the conversations we're having here. Mitchell, you wanted to come back in on this?
Yeah, just one other thing, and if the government's listening, I'm hoping that they'll take my advice, is that to encourage car dealerships or cars manufacturers to keep AM radio in the cars, they're sort of building on a bad structure. I think that the FCC would be better to suggest an improved version of AM and then use that as the thing that people should place in their cars. The problem with AM now is it's based on old technology. Yes, it does have the ability to go farther, but there's a lot more things out there. If you've ever turned your AM radio on now, every little power supply, fluorescent light, wireless device is making lots of noise. Sort of like when you hear a thunderstorm approaching, you hear the static on the AM radio. It makes it very hard to use it as a medium for communication. If they go all digital, that would be a good use of the FCC's time and the government's time to make that transition and then make sure they put AM digital in every car that's out there.
Alex, you want to finish us up on this?
Yeah, I completely agree with Mitchell that we need to move forward. I'm just saying that we need to fix it first. Then we can move forward. So we can't just go, we're just going to throw it into the river. It's a huge ecosystem, and that would destabilize many things that I don't think we see on the surface. So the government just has to actually be logistical about it and have the replacement completely in place before they remove the old thing. And that's all I'm saying. But I do agree with Mitchell. It'd be great to move forward. They've been talking about moving. I used to work at an AM station, and they've been talking about moving AM to digital. And there's technically a digital platform for that. And so the car manufacturers and everyone else just need to update. And that takes a decade. Like it's a decade of saying this is the new format. And what they need to do is say, this is, to Mitchell's point, the regulation needs to be like, all the radios have to have this in them. Now, the problem really is that the consumer I turn on the radio once a month, maybe once a year. I get in and immediately snap my phone to it. So it is an issue that is may solve itself, not so much with radios in the cars, but just that no one's using the radios anymore. So that's the other half of this.
Yes, and great discussion. I want to remind our producers that you can ask questions for either hour now and then vote on those questions, because the questions that get the most votes are what we will spend the most time on. Next question.
From Paul Wallace in Austin, Texas, asking, what are some usable Bluetooth keyboards? For example, Artec, Logitech, with trackpads for smart TVs, for example, Amazon TV, Samsung, LG, etc., particularly for watching and navigating YouTube videos. I get tired of typing with my remote. My K830 is a letdown.
Go ahead, Brendan.
Yes, that's a great question. Wanted to make sure I was the first one to answer that. So I've used lots of different types of keyboard over the years. And as a tech person, I tend to play with lots of different smaller types of PC, TV connectivity type of equipment. And I have played a lot around with that for quite some time. But anyway, so there are a couple different things. If you look at the Kodai, KODOI, that player, also there are lots of different things that you can install that you can use. But I think right now things are streaming. But typically, I know that I have the same issue, right? I've got this keyboard that I use And this is the one, and this is the type, and it's got the pad, like you said, on the side. And I don't really use that very often. I find like it doesn't work very well with the cursor. So I actually like this one a little bit better. This one doesn't have that trackpad, but it's a K38. And so I have a separate mouse that I use because I really don't like that trackpad. I think it's easier. I think it works a little bit better, has more power. So if you're willing to have two pieces of equipment to do the same thing, then that's a thought. I think before, we were using something like this and trying to do this with a remote control. Some remote controls do have the keypad set up where you can do that as opposed to like the traditional keypad on a remote control. So I think that's a little easier. So there's another idea that you can do. They do have those out there. So there's a couple different options.
Thank you. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael. Normally, disability equipment like wheelchairs travels with the passenger. But could the equipment for an athlete with disabilities or a sports team, for example, travel with a carnet?
First, there's a lot of problems with the idea that in air travel, that the wheelchair travels with the person. That's a whole thing. But for the Paralympic teams, this could be an interesting discussion. Alex, what do you think?
For larger teams, this is managed by someone who probably is managing it with a carnet. You can protect anything with a carnet. I think we had a Boomerang in here yesterday, and they said that the smallest thing that they'd seen someone carnet was a fire extinguisher for $20. So anything can be carneted for travel. I think that generally you're not going to be, for the average person, they're not going to be encumbered by this. It would be considered a personal effect. They're not as worried that someone's going to bring one unless you bring lots of them. And then the other thing is, generally, if you're a team, you'll have someone working on those logistics, and so it wouldn't necessarily be something that would affect you directly.
And quite often when they move sports teams like that around, they've got months and months and months of planning into it. And also
for most people who are doing stuff, there are freight forwarders or shippers that will manage this for you. We mentioned it in passing yesterday. We use a company called Rocket, and that is the kind of the state of the art. It's not the cheapest version, but it is but that's but a lot of companies use companies like that, like Rocket, to move their gear around. That way, someone just shows up, they put it in your car, it goes away, it shows up on a pallet somewhere, and amazingly, it will show up on time. I've had 4 or 5 pallets be delivered in 3 feet of snow in Davos to the minute. so it's
nice.
It's not just that they manage the process; they are very precise on time.
Yeah, Brendan.
Yeah, I have a couple of things too. So like disability work and discussion, I know we're going to talk about it too. And people have complained often about like wheelchairs being broken on airplanes. So it's like, how do they improve that airplane experience? And like they get broken when they go down into storage and everything and they arrive, and the wheelchairs, they're stuck without their high powered wheelchair. So that's the only thing they have. So that's an interesting point. And I maybe that's something, we've had those experiences of people getting their wheelchair broken. So maybe like it might be a discussion for using like that service, the CarNet service. Someone who's more careful with equipment, like these guys obviously are. That way, maybe there's specific disability equipment that a CarNet could do, and that way they don't have to have it fixed or anything when they go to the airport.
Alex, can you correct me? But there's a difference between CarNet and the freight forwarder like Rocket.
Yeah.
Am I wrong about that? Can you dig into that a little bit for us?
Yeah, the carnet is simply simply paperwork that ensures that it proved for import and export that you're not managing that. So the carnet is just a piece of paper that says I'm not leaving this equipment in this country, whereas a freight service is moving that stuff. Now, a freight service will use the carnet to say that they're not doing that, but the carnet itself is just a piece of paper.
Thank you. I thought maybe those terms were getting used interchangeably. Let's go to the next question.
From Andy Kokendorfer from Viera, Florida. Andy asks, cellular service, which provider do you find optimizes price and performance living in the U.S., but traveling for European and Canadian gigs? Personal mobile access inquiry, not necessarily live streaming. Thanks.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, so T-Mobile is the best around the world as far as accessibility to different networks. And so in almost every country, when you go into that country, you'll get some service. It's not great service, but it's some service. In almost every country that I've gone to in the world, I've gone to about 60 of them. And so so T-Mobile almost always works. It's not super fast. It's barely usable in those countries, but it's better than nothing. As far as getting texts and basic emails and that type of thing, it's really, really useful. The best way to go when you go into another country, though, is generally to get a rentable system that you can use. So, for instance, this one is I haven't used this one. I was actually giving this as an example to somebody only yesterday. This is called the Hip Pocket. I've used ones like this in Japan, and what this does is it's a Wi-Fi access point that you can rent per day or per week or per month, that you just put in your backpack or you put in your pocket, and it now gives you. Now it's not a cellular connection. You can make phone calls with FaceTime or Messenger or those types of things, but you can't make a regular cellular call. But oftentimes these are very fast. They're 100 megs a second. I mean, they tend to be very good services. And then you're using their cellular. It's very hard to get. I don't know. It's very hard, but I found it to be very challenging to get short-term SIMs in other countries. There are some countries that, especially in Africa, that it's actually not that hard, where you can get those SIMs and you can prepay them, and then you just swap them out in your phone. But once you get to Europe or Asia, a lot of times those are not as readily available, and they want you to be in a long-term contract. So prepaid SIMs are one way to solve that, and just swap the SIM when you get to the country. Then you also have a local phone number for people that are there. When you have two SIMs, which a lot of phones now have, you can have both of those available to you. A lot of times, I generally have more than one phone with me, so I usually put one of them on a local SIM. But you have to do prepaid. You can't do a regular one, and usually the performance on the prepaid ones aren't as good. So they're good for giving people a local phone number to call you or text you. They're not great for anything that takes more work. If you really want performance to do video streaming or to do Zooms or other things, then you really want to look at one of these portable Wi-Fi hotspots.
Go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, I just want to throw it out there. Again, talking about T-Mobile, I have T-Mobile and I think it works pretty well. And a good thing, I know I went to Europe in, 92 and really didn't have any cell phones that time. And so how would we get along? What did we have to do? It's compared to what we have today, we have so much service worldwide, which is great. But for myself, I'm very dependent on speed. So that's a thing you have to look for. If you can look somewhere to see if you have, look before you go research, because I'm using it for sign. So I want like a VRS system or something like that. So you have to, can you call even like a VRS service, a video relay interpreter service in a different country? You just something to think about speed and research before you go.
Albert, are you still overseas?
Yeah, I'm still overseas. I'm in South Korea right now, and so it's a very relevant question. I was actually looking up how to figure that out while I'm staying in Korea. How am I gonna make calls and things like that? And I use T-Mobile as well. And for T-Mobile, if you download the T-Mobile app on mobile on the phone, you can go to the settings and disable the data roaming. There's a setting to disable data roaming and call roamings, right? So separately, so you can either get data only but no calls, or call only but no data, things like that. And I do know that if you actually stay, if you do the data roaming and then stay outside of the United States for longer than 30 days and you keep using the data there, then I heard when I was talking to the customer service agent, they were saying that they will block the plan because because they think that you are using the data overseas way too long. Apparently that's the policy. So what I usually do is I actually disable the data roaming, and I just turn on, I just connect to Wi-Fi, and after connecting Wi-Fi, I connect to I use VPN to connect to the US location server, and that allows me to make a Wi-Fi calling. So it's a calling through the Wi-Fi. So I don't get any kind of international charges, phone call charges, and it shows in the Wi-Fi that because I'm going through the server of the US, it shows that I'm in the United States. So I don't get any international charges. But also T-Mobile has a really good plan for South Korea, for example. As soon as I arrived at the airport, T-Mobile found a data connection. I think T-Mobile has a partnerships with the different countries' telecommunication companies. And then once you arrive there and then you turn the data, cell phone services, then you just get automatically connected to one of that country's partnered companies to T-Mobile. So I was connected to SK Telecom, which is a partner company to T-Mobile, and I was able to use data. I think for me, I was allowed 5 gigabytes, and that was pretty good enough for me. And then for the first day, I do also know that there are other options like Google Fi. Google Fi is also a popular option. You can make a local phone numbers for different countries. I do know, I did also look up Starlink by Elon Musk. So that one is really popular, I think, especially for digital nomads or people who have a van life. So, they get a satellite dish, and then it connects to the Starlink Wi-Fi, and it doesn't cover everywhere in the world yet, as far as I know, but it actually covers a lot of different places when I checked, including South Korea, some Asian countries. And I do hope that actually kind of becomes more popular, so that everyone has internet connection, whether they are in the rural areas or any regions. And also we talked about physical SIMs, but I wanted to add to that because my phone is iPhone 14, and I think from iPhone 14 there's it's a eSIM cards. So you don't actually have the physical SIM cards, and the slot that you can put in the SIM card, it's not it doesn't get opened up, so it's locked. So you cannot use physical SIMs for that. But good thing is that you can go to the settings and then register a eSIM. So you just need to buy the eSIM from that the country that you're visiting. If there's a prepaid card, a prepaid eSIM, that you can purchase that, and then you just need to scan it with the they give you a coupon, QR code, and then you scan it, and then iPhone automatically registers it. And it basically stores 2 SIM cards, right? For me, one United States and then one South Korea. So I use 2 phone numbers in one phone. So you can, and I disable the data for the United States phone number. But I do get the text messages whenever I connect to Wi-Fi, everything. Actually, as far as I know, for T-Mobile, depending on different plans, but as far as I know, text messages are free. And another interesting thing is iPhones, if you use FaceTime between iPhones, even if they are living abroad, as far as I know, it's free. FaceTime video call or audio calls, it's free between iPhones, even if people live abroad or, and text message is same between iPhones. I think it's free. And iPhone actually shows by color of the text message, whether it's green or blue. So blue is, it's free, right? Like it's between iPhones through the Apple network, but green is a charged, right, message. So it means that it's not an iPhone network, right? Things like that. So, I mean, I know that there's a lot of advancements and things like that, but being a digital nomad right now, I have a huge empathy, and I feel so much frustration for these kind of things, like including phone call services or bank, right? But international banking, as well as tax or labor law, right? All these things to navigate, and it's a lot to navigate. But anyways, yeah.
Alex, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, and I just wanted to correct one thing, that the T-Mobile is fine in the United States. If you have a U.S. signal, it's fine in the United States. It's just that when you get overseas, they give you a signal with a partnership that was mentioned earlier with many, many cities, but that connection is not particularly good. So, so it's there as it's serviceable, but not great. And again, I would highly recommend looking at, especially if you're going to be somewhere for a week, is looking at these portable Wi-Fis, because you just connect over Wi-Fi and you carry it around and you don't have to worry about the other thing to know is that all over the world, Starbucks has Wi-Fi, and I have a little thing in the back of my head knowing I will remember where every Starbucks is as I go, not because I get their coffee, which I do, but I don't get the coffee necessarily, but I know that I can go there to check my email. so I always keep that in my mind.
Michael, you wanted to jump in here?
Yeah, I think I wasn't thinking about that question till now that you all mentioned it. So I also use T-Mobile when I travel, and I do travel a lot to different countries, and I never really had any issues. But I just realized something is that I'm going on a cruise. I leave this Thursday for 2 weeks, and a nice vacation. But then I just realized, with your help, I guess. I know the cruise is only offering me 150 minutes worth of internet, and after that you have to pay. So does anyone know if there's, for a cruise specific, is there something to work with my phone, or would it work with my phone, or do I have to rely on the cruise company, their ships? I'm just trying to understand how that works on a cruise. Does anyone know, or anyone can help me with that? And I just don't want to pay a lot of money.
Alex?
Yeah, there's not a lot of infrastructure in cruises. I think that's part of what people consider a feature, is that they're hard to reach. You're hard to reach on the cruise, and you're disconnected from the rest of the world. There are some very expensive plans that you can get on cruises, but they're not. But it's usually an excuse for you to say, "I'm not available," and then you can enjoy the cruise.
Albert?
Yeah, I think that's where Starlink is actually pretty excelling. So like they have a maritime plan. So a lot of like ships or yachts or they have a maritime plan. You can get the satellite for that for while you're ocean, and then they connect you to internet. I heard that it's pretty good, but it also depends on the weather condition and where you are. But I think I heard that I also know that like cruise ships or container ships use this Starlink a lot. So they have they give Wi-Fi to the crew in the ship. But I don't know about like a different cruise companies and how they use they connect the Wi-Fi. But I just wanted to add this to the conversation.
Thank you. Next question.
Vic Hernandez from Springfield, Missouri. Room treatment to mitigate any potential audio issues that may be arising. What about a second hour on producing outdoor events with the best possible audio? This is helpful.
Alex?
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So we'll definitely put that in. We'll see if we can find some good, whether it's outdoor or large events. We'll see if we can't find someone to jump on the show and talk about what it takes to get those speaker systems ready to go.
Next question.
Peter Moore in Auckland, New Zealand. It's winter here. Is there a recommended temperature that studio equipment should operate at? I know my guitars, being made of wood, respond to temp changes. What about audio-video equipment?
Go ahead, Alex.
The audio and video equipment can actually get pretty cold before it starts to. Obviously, you don't want to go under freezing, but most audio equipment can get into the. We've operated audio. I mean, our audio video equipment in the 40-degree range without 40-degree Fahrenheit. Degree range. So low teens or high singles in Celsius. And so we definitely have had that work fine. Things with wood, like your equipment, are more sensitive than the audio video equipment is. Audio video equipment is much more sensitive to hot temperatures. And the only thing that you have to be careful about is going from hot to cold. So the problem with audio video equipment is when you go hot to cold, they'll form condensation on the electronics, which can cause shorts. So you have to, if you're going to go in and out, you want to be thinking about desiccation and making sure that it's very, very dry in the cases that they're in when they're moving from one temperature to another.
Alex, you've said you've actually saved the little gel packs that come in things and use that and put that in with like your camera lenses and that.
Yeah, I don't have it now, but I used to have a jar. Every time I got desiccation, I just throw the desiccators in a jar and keep them all together so that I could always throw them in things. Now, when we put it in equipment, you can buy big jars of desiccators and put them in these little things and stick them inside the equipment. And so the desiccation tablets themselves are much larger, which is nice because they don't get into everything. so they, and then you can take them, you can put them into something, dry it out, and you can actually bake them, put them in a regular oven and bake them, and it'll take all the water out of it again, and they'll change color, and then you can use them again. So there's reusable ones as well. But I figure I'm not going to, why throw away the desiccation when I can just put it in somewhere and use it if I need to, because we used to use it a lot.
Very good. Next question.
Jeff Cohen from Miami Beach, Florida asked, YouTube just launched multi-view. Once it's more broadly available, how might a panel show like this utilize it?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, for those of you not familiar, multi-view is the ability to see two different video feeds in the same window. And really, YouTube's doing this to help get into the sports market. That's a requirement for people who are really into sports, is to be able to see two games at once. Since it's set at the viewer's side, I would think the only way we could really use it here in this community is maybe as a second ear experience, where you could have a keynote feed playing in one window and you can see everyone's reaction in the second.
Alex?
Yeah, I think this is particularly useful for exactly what John talked about, which is watching multiple different things. It's very confusing in the article that they put because they kind of show basketball all the way through. I think it would have been clearer if they'd shown different things in each one of those, because as separate streams, that makes sense. We've done a lot of testing with partners related to multi-camera from a single show, so multiple cameras from one sports event. and we found that the drop off after about 5 minutes back to program was dramatic. So over 90% of the viewers, and sometimes 95% of the viewers, will stop watching multi-view of a single game and go back to the curated program within 10 minutes. Because it's just too much work. They just want to sit and watch the film. And so we've seen Verizon do this, and a lot of others have made these multi-angles available, and no one actually really uses them.
Alex, would this be something that would be helpful? Like, we've talked about having 2 different languages of ASL offered at the same time of sign language. Could it be selectable? Like, we could send it out to just the office hours page and then it would be selectable?
It could be. I mean, I think that we'd have to look at it. I think this is for YouTube TV. I don't think this is for YouTube itself. So those are similar architectures, but not the same. So I don't know. I don't think that this feature is something that we're going to see on YouTube until it really solves itself inside of YouTube TV. It solves a real problem for YouTube TV. It creates a lot of problems for YouTube, because allowing everybody to do that is different than having it work within the verticals that they have there. So I think that it would be unlikely that they would make it available. Maybe I could be wrong, though. I mean, I have no idea.
Yep. Thank you. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael asking, Teradek offers a dedicated cellular data plan that is geared towards streaming. Would a plan like this have any advantages to a generic mobile virtual network operator or direct operator sold plan?
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, it's a lot simpler to manage if you let somebody else do it. So we use a live view often, and in that live view, they manage the data plan for us. Managing a lot of data flexibly over multiple locations is something that is not trivial. And even if you especially for these cellular data that Teradek is using for their bond solutions. Their bonded solutions. Even if you see, like Verizon sees you using 2 or 3 SIMs in the same device, Verizon will oftentimes close those down, or slow them down. And so you have to be. It's much easier to allow the service provider to do that. You can build it your own. We use PepLinks and other things like that, but whether it's using Keenan Campbell has disaster recovery, which will manages that bonded solution for you. You can get it from a variety of different services, but you want somebody else to manage that. It's really not, and it's not cost effective. You're paying per unit, and it's a pretty expensive way to manage that.
Next question.
Peter Moore from Auckland, New Zealand asks, I watched Apple TV's highlights of Lionel Messi's second game where he scored 2 goals. Apple was using camera angles and the wired as in a camera on a wire that I'm used to seeing in cricket and American football, but I've never seen in soccer before. Thoughts?
Go ahead, Alex.
It's nice when you have all the money. So Apple's going to keep on throwing production value at things that you probably haven't seen before. I think that you're going to find that within 2 years, the MLS coverage is going to be better than whether the MLS players are as good as the other players around the world. The coverage of MLS will be better than anything else in the world. So I think that's what you can expect over the next couple of years.
Next question.
John Fisher from Oklahoma City, Oklahoma has a question. Loading older Apple photo libraries on a Mac Mini M2 Pro works fine, but processing and export of those 20,000 photos is lasting days without any error messages or not responding statuses. Should I keep waiting or try something new?
Ooh, good question. Alex?
Yeah, I would do it in pieces. That's a lot of things to do all at one time. Generally, if I see something locking up like that, I will almost always go back to sections and grabbing sections at a time, and first do one, then do a whole folder or do a group of them, and then start systematically moving through them. I mean, it may still work, and it may just take a long time to process, but I would, and I'm curious about what you're processing as well. So the question is, are you going to an old photo? Are you going from iPhoto from photos and pulling a photos library into another photos library, and especially if it's old, I would recommend, and I say this for someone who's had a very bad experience in this area, do not import a library into another photos library until you've exported the full res versions into a folder on their own. I've had issues where photos imported older iPhotos libraries, and all I got were the previews. So I have small versions of certain things that I shot forever. Like it because I just let it go after that. I thought it was all in there. I saw all the images when I rolled through them, but when I went to see the full resolution, they were not full resolution anymore. So I would recommend, if you're ever going to import one iPhoto library into another, that you export full resolution out first.
Very good. We're getting to the top of the hour. Alex, do you have a quick preview for us?
I don't have that handy.
Coming up next week? Okay.
I just looked for it. The email that went out today. The email that went out today didn't have the new stuff. I just went to look for it, and either I didn't get the email or it didn't get updated. So I don't have that. We probably do one more question quickly.
Yeah. Next question.
All right, Eric Hers is here from Hartford, Connecticut. If I plan to use Elemental Link for streaming, how can I send an output to Zoom? Alternatively, how can I convert SDI to a virtual camera source for Zoom?
Alex?
Yeah, there's a lot of tools that will do. I mean, anything that will convert a 12, the 12G, the web presenter, even the SDI A10 minis will all convert the SDI to what looks like a webcam. Zoom is actually very robust at seeing other things like deck links and so on. So you can have a small deck link card, a mini converter. Those are all things that will convert the SDI into what looks like a camera available for Zoom. So you shouldn't have too much trouble with that. But it will be a separate feed. The problem with the Elemental Link is that it's going to take a couple seconds to get to AWS and then a couple seconds to get out. So if you're using the Elemental Link as the delivery method for Zoom, you're going to notice that it's seconds behind. Now, if you're watching the stream, it doesn't matter. But if you're if you're trying to interact with it in any way, it's going to be very latent. So I think that'd be the thing that I'd concern about. So what I would do is take the original SDI signal and then put it into a computer. Remember that you need at least 4 cores to be able to have a PC that will ingest that, or any Mac that's sold right now will be able to produce a 1080p stream. The smaller PCs can do a 720p into YouTube from just a web, from whatever inputs they have. But to get 1080p, you need at least 4 cores on a PC or any Mac that's made right now.
All right. Great hour, everybody. I'm just going to hand it over to Tim to kind of lead our brainstorming discussion. I'm really excited about this.
All right. Thanks, Laura. So, we've really enjoyed having some time to talk about accessibility the past few weeks. And what we wanted to do today was just spend a little time brainstorming on what topics should we cover. In the past, we just sort of brought in who was available and who we had, kind of on the list queued up. And of course, we've built a great set of panelists based on those guests. And we're so excited to have new folks that join us every week, Albert and Brendan and Michael, and of course the longtime folks that have been here, Laura and Andy and all of the others. But we just want to talk about what topics everybody is interested in and related to accessibility, and just brainstorm a little bit. So we're going to take questions today, and we'll probably give some answers, but really we want to discuss these questions and see if these are things we should talk about on future shows. So with that, let's get into some of these questions and just and see where this discussion goes, and we'll take a lot of notes and see what we can build up for future shows. So Mitchell, let's go ahead into the first question here.
Thanks, Tim. The first question comes to us from Laura Thompson in Beaumont, Texas, and here on our panel. The differences between IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and the ADAA, Americans with Disability Amendments Act, in short self-advocacy.
Yeah, and Laura, go ahead and start us off here.
There is a graphic out there that I love that says IDEA equals success, ADA equals access. And I think sometimes our IEP and 504 students are shortchanged by our school system because they don't understand when they get out of K through 12 what advocacy looks like, how to articulate what they need. And I could be wrong. This panel could be absolutely have a different opinion, which I'm absolutely happy to hear, but I think it would be a really good discussion about what those differences in the way those things function are.
Brendan, go ahead and chime in.
Yeah, that's a great discussion. I think there's many things, there's different perspectives on those two laws. Really, it's three, the IDA and then the ADA and also the ADAA. So I think that's definitely something we can get into and we can have a great, robust discussion there. I'm an advocate myself. I advocate for my own rights. And I did that throughout all of high school.
Great. And, typically on Saturdays, for those that have been around a while, we had education hours and John Snyder here today, has been a big part of that. And, we're looking forward to working on accessibility and education together. And we might even occasionally have an episode that crosses those two subject matters. And this would be a great, a great discussion there, right? To talk about the different acts and how that fits into education and people with disabilities inside and outside of education and the workplace. So, all right, let's go ahead to the next question.
And the next question is in from our host, Tim David, who's traveling in Winter Garden, Florida. What would it entail to have a deafblind panelist on office hours?
Michael, go ahead.
Okay, well, for office hours, obviously we're through Zoom. We're using Zoom. If so, then the deafblind person would need an interpreter with them physically. That's the only solution. Sometimes they would have to have two interpreters, one for pro-tactile, which is signing on the back and kind of showing what they're looking at, showing more of the atmosphere, what's the surroundings doing. And then someone signing tactically, which is signing over or under the person's hand to be saying what's being said. So that's the only solution. And I have seen it done on Zoom, but the interpreters have to be in the room.
I'm at a conference this week, and it's the Telecommunications for Deaf TDI conference, and they did a panel this morning on deafblind. And it was fascinating to watch and, just see what was involved. And of course, the panelists were amazing, just hearing their experiences and their content. And, I encourage everybody, if you ever get a chance to, go to a disability conference and watch people with all disabilities, of course, but, when someone has a dual sensory disability, the experience of just watching what they have to do to receive information, to convey information, is just a great learning experience for all of us. So, all right, let's go ahead to the next question.
I think Brendan Gilbert from Fort Worth, Texas has a question. Challenges of disabled people in attaining leadership positions due to accessibility, accommodations, or perception issues.
All right, John.
I feel like accessibility in the workplace is almost a recurring theme that you could have multiple times throughout the year. I also would be really interested to hear a conversation on how do you be a great leader, especially if you are a leader with a disability and you have direct reports who don't have that, and how do you manage that relationship? Because I imagine it's incredibly challenging.
Thanks, John. Let's go over to Brendan.
So obviously, I wrote this and I asked it, the reason being, is I noticed there's not enough leadership, people with disabilities who have leadership, because we want that to have that more. And like at the executive level or the CFO, CEO level, if it's a big company, they don't have people with disability. There might be a few people, one or two, but they're not. And these are like significant disabilities for people who, we have at Microsoft, we have a chief executive officer who has a disability, but she can speak well. So that's not but I'm looking for people who have more of like significant disabilities. At Meta, we had someone who had mild hard of hearing. And let me go back. My point is, it's a great discussion for everyone to know, like, how can we have this, we just want to throw this idea out here, what the impact would be to see a disabled leader having, more presentations about people with disabilities. And I think that would affect more hiring, and less than, we wouldn't have to fight for access and accommodations as much if we had those people. So I think this is something we could really go into, and we could talk a lot about it.
Excellent. Thanks, Brennan. Michael.
Before I answer that question, I just wanted to add one more thing, and I should have mentioned it for the previous question about deafblind having them on the panel. One thing I noticed when I run a Zoom meeting, one of my good friends, they have Usher syndrome. And as we know, blindness as a deafness is a gambit of how much sight you have. They always, as a manager, I would always say, Tim wants to speak. We'd always call the people. So then they would know who to look for. So you'd always want to mention someone, because in Zoom, there's so many different little boxes. You don't know who's always talking. That gives a person time to answer, and a person be able to watch who's talking. And that way the interpreter also knows. So, and sometimes people with Usher symbols, they have to look, people who have limited sight, they have to look for who's talking. And same with the deaf people. If someone's signing, it's a little bit different if they're all signing, but that was for the other question. Now with this question, I have to admit, one thing I think of today, there's more and more companies out there that are familiar or aware of deaf and other disabilities. There's a lot of PR that's happening, a lot of movies and TVs and about disabilities. And with that, that's great. But one thing, and I'm going to specifically talk about being deaf here, many deaf people were deprived of language growing up to a different degree. And I'm not speaking of those maybe who are hearing and become deaf later in life. I'm speaking of people who were born deaf and they've never heard any sound. They were language deprived. And they should be given questions like in advance of an interview. And I think I've mentioned this before, to actually have time to process the question and look and know at the interpreter, because again, the interpreter is going to translate the question from the speaker to the language. Now, the interpreter has that process where they have to translate that from English to ASL. And then I have to translate that back to what the interpreter is trying to say. And that takes up a lot of time, and it's exhausting on our brains too.
That's great. Thanks, Michael. Go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, I think that if we are going to talk about the challenges of disabled people attaining leadership positions, I think we need to definitely address the issues after getting hired, right? Like I know that there's a lot of ongoing effort in HR field to hire more, diversity, neurodivergent candidates and people with disabilities. But but after hiring, there doesn't seem to have much attention going into setting people who are hired up for success, right? And if we don't if we are just hiring for the number, I think that's not a true inclusion, and I think that's more like just a show, right? Just to show, and I think if you want to talk about like the challenges of how can you help disabled people attain the leadership positions, then we need to definitely address how do we set them up for success? How do we set employees with disabilities up for success? Also, I think I am like just imagining myself like having a disabled person in the leadership position would definitely help me sell digital accessibility much better, like much easier for me, because a lot of my work as a digital accessibility consultant is there's only 10% of technical work, I personally feel, and 90% is more about navigating the politics and navigating and being able to sell, digital accessibility, and that we need to think about inclusive design. We need to think about accessibility when we are thinking about building a digital product. So, and sometimes it's very hard to sell because it's hard to because the leadership doesn't really cannot empathize with the actual experience and struggles, right? And I think putting people with disabilities in the leadership position will definitely help companies to move forward and build a culture that they want to build, right? If they have a diversity inclusion mission or values in their company statement and want to build an inclusive work environment. So yeah, like personally, I think that it would definitely help me do my job better. So, and I'd love to talk about this topic more.
That's great. Thanks, Albert. Brenda, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, just the last little comment there. I know we have a bunch more, but I thank you for breaking that up, Albert. And that's right. For example, what do you do after you're hired? That's been my, problem for a couple of years now. It's like, okay, great. Then they just move on to different companies, and you have, different companies and they don't provide, I'm a great worker, but they don't provide access. It's like, oh, good boy, put you in the corner. And it's like, no, I want to do work. I want to improve. I want to keep going. And then again, I worked at Meta and I got promoted. It was the first time there. And, I was there for a few years, but unfortunately they had some other things happen and I didn't get to stay. So I think, would it help accessibility? Yes, because the more you see people with disabilities and the more you recognize it, and that becomes the standard, whether it's at a lecture or a presentation or whatever. But if the leader has an interpreter or has something, then it's more visible and more noticeable. And Michael.
Great, thanks.
Up too, Tim.
Oh, yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Thank you. I just wanted to add to what Albert said too, because I have a sad and funny story to share. My girlfriend works in retail. I'll just say that. And they got an interpreter. And they had the interpreter there every day, 40 hours a week. And then one day, the manager decided to cancel the interpreter service. Just completely remove it. And their rationale for this, someone asked for help, so I tried to help explain. The rationale for canceling the interpreter was there wasn't enough deaf people coming to that place. But they forgot that the interpreter was for hearing people who are coming to the store to communicate with their deaf employer or deaf employee. It wasn't for the deaf community to come, but it was for the hearing community to talk to the deaf people. So it was a kind of reverse, and making the manager understand that, but a reverse idea that interpreters are for hearing people to understand deaf sign language.
Thanks, Michael. This is a great topic. I think it was last week, we talked about employment issues related to people with disabilities. And, this goes hand in hand. Once we get folks with disabilities employed, how do we get them in positions of leadership? How do we get them in positions that are more qualified and should be in, as opposed to low-level basic positions? There's another topic here that might fit into this about underpay. There are still laws in this country that allow people with disabilities to be paid less than minimum wage. And there's a multitude of groups working on fighting those and getting those changed, but they're still in place. So so a lot of topics that I think we could discuss around employing people with disabilities, and of course all the access requirements or accommodations. Just the story Michael just told. This person needed an interpreter, and it's like, we don't need enough. And that would be like saying, it's like, we've got all this stuff to move around the warehouse, but let's go ahead and cancel that forklift because they don't need it. And now you got people coming in trying to carry 500-pound pallets around because we just felt like we didn't need the forklift. That's their access requirement. The interpreter is another person's access requirement. Don't leave these things out. We got to make sure that we allow people to have the access they need to work. Okay, let's make a note of that one, and let's go on to the next topic, Mitchell.
Next one in from John Snyder in Reno, Nevada, for a Saturday topic idea. Bring on someone from AssistiveWare to discuss Proloquo.
And John.
Proloquo is an app that allows for people who are nonverbal to communicate, or just different types of communication between verbal and nonverbal people. It's basically a grid of images, and you click on the image you want to piece together sentences. My two boys both have autism, and one of them is nearly nonverbal, and it was invaluable for us to have that tool when he was age 5 to 7 or so.
That's great. Thanks, John. And for those that are not familiar with the app, I would encourage you to go to AssistiveWare's website. They have a great list of kind of stories and case studies and success stories on people that use their products, and a lot of encouragement to see what's possible in just amazing stories out there. There's a young lady named Jordan Zimmerman. I think we've mentioned her name in prior episodes, but Jordan is a user of AssistiveWare products, and there's a movie about her called It's Not About Me that kind of shows her life and how she uses AAC, alternative communication products and devices, to get through her life. So I think this is a great topic, John, and would be wonderful to bring someone on to talk about the solutions, and even someone that uses one of those devices to interact with us, so we can ask questions on how they use it throughout the day, and what their needs are, and when they. So thanks for bringing that up, John. I think this would be a great topic for sure, and we'll make a note of that one and get someone both from the company and a user on, so we can learn more about that. Okay, Mitchell, let's go to the next topic.
Okay, next one. Brendan Gilbert from Fort Worth, Texas, here on our panel, asks, should we discuss challenges in the workplace, offices, etc., with physical accessibility too?
All right, Brendan, since you brought that one up, let me hear your thoughts on this. I want to hear your thoughts on the topic.
Sure. Yeah, as far as a deaf person, I would say, as far as accessibility goes, getting into physical structures like buildings, there are some good things and some bad things to note. You think things like cameras, right? For accessibility, it's very frustrating. I was at work at a data center, very high security location. And so I'm like, I can't hear, I'm looking at a security camera and I'm like, I can't hear. And they're trying to talk to me through a security camera. As a deaf person, that's not accessible, right? And an alternative solution would be something where the deaf person, like there's different people that, access that building, right? So it needs to be accessible for everyone, for physical structures like that. And then another thing for deafblind people or blind people, how would they access that? How would they navigate putting in an access code or something like that? So lots of different barriers for disabled people. Another thing would be if, let's say, if a person doesn't understand, wheelchair accessibility, or like a kids gym, like gymnastics, going to gymnastics. If there's special events or there's lots of people and, kids are excited and there's an audience and they're watching. My mother-in-law has a wheelchair. She uses a wheelchair. She has MS. And so, hopefully it's not too far when we go to a location like that, because she does use a wheelchair. And so if there's a raised platform, she doesn't have access to that, and so everyone should have access to seeing the event, but that's a barrier for her where she can't. And so, it becomes an issue where we have to physically, remove her from her chair. And then it's just, people are watching. So it becomes a real barrier. Those physical barriers can be a real problem for everyone.
Go ahead, Albert.
Yeah, I think that this is definitely a topic that we should include in the discussion that the question that we mentioned before, Brandon mentioned. And I wanted to mention why it's important to talk about this, because if we don't, the reason is that it's very hard for you to design Barbie doll when you have the entire leadership team only male, right? Like a design and create a good product, right? So like that's why it's important. In order, there's only so much that we can teach about the empathy, right, through textbook. There's a lot more that comes from the lived experience, right? And there's the insight is very different. And let me mention why it's also important. Employee accessibility is very, very important. And that includes not just the physical accessibility of the building, but also the software that employees use, right? Are people with disabilities able to employees with disabilities able to access the software? Because nowadays a lot of the jobs require computer work as well, right? And that's why, for example, Microsoft, a lot of large tech companies like Microsoft, they don't purchase enterprise software if they are not accessible, right? And also, if you want to work with any government, or if you want to sell your product to government, federal government, or any, they don't buy. They require you to do accessibility testing and know where you are in terms of accessibility status of your product. So you need to make them accessible. And the really important thing is that am I gonna make an accessible product when I don't even know like what the lived experience of employees with disability is, right? So that's why I think this is important, including physical accessibility as well as digital accessibility. And we need to talk more about including employees with disabilities in the workplace, and it's just when there are more employees with disabilities in the office going through a challenges day by day accessing the workplace, then you are able to recognize and detect what the problems are and make it better, right? So and by doing that, you make your workplace more accessible too, right? If there's no one who's speaking up about the problem, there's no improvement. So yeah.
Great. Thanks, Albert. Laura.
Yeah, we could actually pull this one apart into several different topics. We talked a little bit earlier. I know when Danny and Vaughn were on, they talked a little bit about airlines and just, people travel for work and how difficult that can be. and then just the basics of what the requirements on a physical space are. So there are possibly a couple different ways we could take this one, breaking down the basics as well as those higher level lived experience discussions.
Great.
Brendan,
Thanks,
go
Laura.
ahead.
Let's go over to Brendan. Brendan?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of different things we can unpack in that topic. And I think that there's a much broader, deeper discussion about that, software specific and also physical space. Software can be its own thing, right? There's a lot to talk about there, and physical environment as well. Things like you said, air travel for work. I've had experience with that. People have talked about their experience with broken equipment, very narrow spaces. How do people with disabilities use the bathroom when they're on a flight? So I think there's lots to talk about there. Restaurant too. We need to talk about restaurant accessibility. In the office, I've noticed that it's not as accessible for people in wheelchairs. A lot of times they're very small spaces. And so how do you navigate that small space to be independent for those types of activities? So lots to talk about there.
Thanks, Brendan. All right, let's go over to the next topic, Mitchell.
From John Snyder in Reno, Nevada, John asked, topic idea, adaptive sports equipment.
And John.
I don't know if it fits super well into office hours, but the hospital I work for, I found out this week, hosts every year an outdoor recreation adaptive sports seminar where they focus on things like adaptive equipment for mountain biking or rock climbing, because we're up in the Lake Tahoe area. And I just thought it was some really interesting and cool gear, that kind of geeky stuff that a lot of people in the office hours community do like. I'm just curious if other people would be interested in something like that.
I love that. Thanks, John. Laura, go ahead and comment.
What you guys don't know is I almost went into adaptive physical education. My bachelor's degree is in exercise science, and I almost, instead of doing it with my BSK, I almost ended up doing adaptive physical education K through 12 instead of. So I actually am relatively well acquainted with Dr. David Lorenzi, who has done a lot in this area. I might be able to reach out to him and see if he would be even willing to come in and have a talk with us.
That's great. Thanks, Laura. I definitely agree, John. It'd be a great topic, and I think it fits well. A lot of the gear and equipment itself might be a little hard to show in this format, but we could certainly, revert back to the old-fashioned keynote slides and show some of this gear and show how it's used. And I think this would be a great topic, and probably something a lot of folks aren't as aware of. I think a lot of people have probably seen images of, the Paralympics and things like that, but they may not realize all that's available. So very good. Thank you, John, for bringing that up. Mitchell, let's go ahead to the next topic.
And it's Brendan Gilbert from Fort Worth, Texas, and here on our panel, should we discuss various future tech being worked on and do presentations on them, plus a quick Q&A? Example, VSL Labs, English to ASL Avatar, or PS5 Accessibility Joystick.
All right, go ahead, Albert.
I love this topic because I'm a tech guru and I dig into different new technologies all the time, and I'd love to talk about metaverse. Apple Vision Pro is coming, right? I'd love to talk about the accessibility of the AR, VR, as well as including artificial intelligence like ChatGPT, because if you think about it, the statistics show that a lot of people with mental health challenges, the first thing that they do when they are trying to find out about their treatment is search online, right? And I do imagine soon all the searches will be paired with AI, right? Like ChatGPT. And if the ChatGPT is communicating a wrong medical information, for example, right? that is a huge problem. So, things like this, I think it's really a good topic that we can talk about many different technologies, different new products upcoming, and share about what do we think the rising problems could be, and how can you prevent that, or if there are already existing problems, how can you fix that as well, and the impact and things like that. I love this topic.
All right, go ahead, Brendan.
Yeah, Albert, I'm happy you love that topic. I think we would have a lot to discuss with. And like VRA, VR, that's a huge topic because VR for deaf people right now, it's not accessible. You put it on your eyes and you can't hear anything. So that's very interesting. And other things too, physical adaptations. So when you talk about wheelchairs and everything, there's a lot of cool topics. And then we talk about augmented reality. A lot of people want that because, again, we want to, people, as you know, with the hearing, and we are able to hear noise and ever, but hopefully the better technology will be able to filter out sounds and everything a little bit more. Oh, maybe you heard something and there's a topic I can join, and I want to be there. I want to be in there, but right now it's all focused on sound and stuff, and it's a hearing environment, and I can't be in there, and I'm missing a lot of stuff. So, it's a sound wall I'm getting. They're doing amazing things. They're doing amazing business, but I'm behind because it's not accessible. And Chat GPT, that's the hot topic, AI. I think that will help many of us, many people with disabilities. And from my viewpoint, and Michael too brought this up, people who are deaf have not had language, have been deprived from language for one reason or another. But maybe they now with Chat GPT, they can write better and they can do English that's more easily understandable to someone, can help with writing and everything. And that's awesome. That is such a great thing that we could have. So there's a lot of discussion. I think a lot of fun we can have as well.
Thanks, Brendan. And Albert, you wanted to chime back in on this one?
Yeah, I think it's also, this topic is important not only for people with disabilities, but also safety of the children, right? For example, I do know that VR, the metaverse issue, there's like a space created, and people can network, right? Like people can chat and hang out, and all the images are avatars, right? But then imagine your child putting on VR set and then joining that community and networking, and then there's some guy through the avatar, right? Like come and do a sexual harassment, and that actually happened. So it actually became an issue. So as far as I know, I don't want to mention specific device and software, but they had to set a boundary for each avatar's distance, for example, right? This is I think it applies to a lot of population, not just people with disabilities. So I think it's a great topic again. Yeah, I'd love to talk about it.
Great. Thanks, Albert. Mitchell, let's go ahead to the next topic.
From Tlaloc Lopez Waterman, traveling in Macon, Georgia, I would request a second look at etiquette. Let's take a deep dive on the words that we use to lift up all people. How can we better learn to think outside of our own limited perspective?
Great. Laura.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for this. And we need to look at how we're going to do that, but it might be helpful to slice it down one subject or set of subjects at a time. Blind, deaf, person first language, all those different things. We could probably spend several hours on that one topic alone.
I agree, Laura. And as we were learning and adapting to the new show, we didn't dive into that topic as deeply as we wanted to the first go around. It's definitely something we want to revisit. And I agree with Laura that it would be great to have kind of disability etiquette for blind and low vision and disability etiquette for deaf and hard of hearing, kind of break those down so we can really dive in and learn from those communities and, learn the language and the all of the topics that will help us help our friends and colleagues and coworkers, moving forward. So, Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with what you just said, Tim, and what Laura said, and I commend Talalik for asking the question. As a reader, yes, I'm hearing, and I want to make sure that I do the best I can to make everybody feel the most comfortable as they can. And I have learned an amazing amount on the past 8 weeks or so that we've done this about etiquette and the proper way to reference folks that have disabilities, how to approach them, how to engage, and how to be just a regular person. To me, that's worth its weight in gold.
Thanks, Mitchell. Brendan.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning. So with etiquette in a situation in like an office meeting, and would be something more we could expand on when you're talking about what you can learn from this, is like where, like for us, for deaf people, where do you put the interpreter? And in person, if you have a problem with a specific person and maybe this person doesn't understand deaf and you have an interpreter there and they'll look at the interpreter and they'll say, well, tell Brendan this and tell them this. And that's something we want to avoid and talk directly to the person. And you don't want that disability the person with a disability to feel like they're left out or feel like they're separated. You really want to be able to be yourself and be in situations. And you don't want other people without disabilities to feel scared. You want them to come up to us. We're just regular people.
That's great. Thanks, Brendan. Mitchell, let's go ahead to the next topic.
Robert Sababity from Poland asked, topic for discussion: different ways to stream to video players to allow audience to select what interpretation they want: sign language, simultaneous interpretation, captions, and or translated captions.
This is great, Robert. I think this is an awesome suggestion. And to me, this fits the office hours goals and culture, right? This is what office hours is about, is how to find solutions to these issues and, discover and formulate, and test solutions for these topics. So I really hope this is something not only that we can discuss, but maybe we can even, try on this show and, and get some of these out there. But Brendan, go ahead and add your comments to this.
Thank you. I've learned a lot too about event production from office hours. So just a lot of things that we can apply and a lot of education, and what we've discussed throughout has been really awesome. And I think it'd be great for everyone out there and this kind of topic to see, for big events or big meetings, how they could do this, because some people just don't realize that when we're talking about, how to stream things in or having an interpreter there, when you have an accessibility player, some, you only see a little bit, or they'll use like a white screen and everything. And the options are hard to use. And it's hard for people who are visual, who have impairment with their vision. So Google so far is pretty good. Considering a language too, having the language on there on the screen, you can just to have it available for everyone, to have it much as possible. So like I have an event next week, it's Monday and Tuesday, and I'm going to talk with people there about job seeking as a job seeker myself and my experience. And I talked a little bit about yesterday, I think, trying to remember, I did talk about someone. It was like, to think about an interpreter. They say, okay, I'll help them. How do you get an interpreter? How do you set it up? Because we're using RealStream OS or SO. And so you can do the little boxes where you have it, but they weren't sure how to have interpreters and how to switch them. So there's a lot of education there. And I think if we can get that education out there, it would just improve everyone's life. It would be great for everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. Okay, Mitchell, let's go ahead to the next topic.
Next topic coming in from Douglas Carmichael, and Douglas asked, navigating the U.S. Social Security Administration and other support systems.
All right, Laura.
Yes, I think this is a really, really good topic. I don't know that we could cover everything. Again, that's one of those ones I don't think we could cover everything in an hour, but maybe having somebody come in or find the resources and database those resources as best as possible for people.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Agree with that. And Albert?
Yeah, I love this topic because I think that I already know a lot of the challenges that I face when I try to access government services. And during the COVID, especially, a lot of the physical offices were closed, and you were forced to use the websites, government websites to navigate and access the social services. But a lot of the websites were not accessible, right? So that was a huge issue, and I think this not only again applies to people with disabilities, but also, for example, right now I'm in South Korea, and I realize that there's so much inaccessibility for foreigners, right? For foreigners, because I have only US credit cards, right? And I cannot make any online transactions in South Korean website using US credit card or any credit card outside of South Korea issued by South Korean bank, which is really a surprise to me, because when I think about South Korea, it's a very developed, high tech, but in terms of that financial system, it's a Galapagos, right? It's like a isolated. And they say that the reason is because they want to prevent the reason why I'm not able to have that access is because they all the online transactions, they have to verify the identity of the person, and the way they verify is through the bank account or mobile phone number, Korean mobile phone number. So either you get a Korean phone or you have a Korean bank, right, to be able to make online transactions. Things like this, right? Not only this, but also immigration-wise, right? And I do know that a lot of the discussions often focus on the region, the North American region, but also a lot of Americans traveling to Asia or different countries, and they want to work as an expat, or they just want to travel as a tourist. There's also a lot of when the foreigners are trying to access the government system, such as immigration office of different countries, there's also accessibility issues, right? And I felt I have that with the U.S. immigration office, right? And not only immigration, but also education wise. And there's also conflict. For example, for schools in the United States, international students are not allowed to take more than, they are required, all international students are required to take 12 units, right, per semester. But what if I have a medical condition and I need to reduce the course load, right? Like things like that. But things like this, like there's just a lot of challenges. So we can discuss for education only. Oh, like what are the how do we navigate the education system? Or we can also talk about immigration system, or driver's license as well, right? Like how do we talk about accessibility for that? And yeah, I love this topic, and I think there's a lot to discuss.
Great. Thanks, Albert. Let's go over to John.
I agree that this is an important topic, and I think there will be two specific challenges that we'll need to overcome. The first of which is we're a global organization, and the U.S. Social Security Administration is a national organization. Secondly, even within the US, many of the Social Security's offices integrate with or utilize third-party administrators for a lot of their different services, and that can vary wildly from state to state or even within the state. Just as one example, in the state of Nevada, if you're on Medicaid, you will have one of 3 different insurance plans, actually 4 now that I think about it, depending where you live, and navigating each one of those 4 different plans is a totally different experience.
Great, John. Thanks. And Brendan.
As a deaf person, I would love to learn more about other countries and how they access those types of services. I haven't traveled enough yet. I would like to, but I think that places like Asia, I know that it would be very difficult to navigate to get help if I needed it. Also, with Social Security, that's an issue in the US as well. Like you said, different insurance companies, depending on where you're located. So I definitely agree that would be a challenge. So just my thought on that.
Thanks, Brendan. Okay, Mitchell, let's go ahead to the next topic.
Laura Thompson from Beaumont, Texas suggests service dog versus emotional support animals.
Great, Laura. Let's hear from your thoughts on this.
Well, let's just kind of start with the idea that they are 2 different things. Emotional support animals do not have public access rights. People understanding what those are, what's the difference between an emotional support animal and a service dog, hearing dog, dog guide. Guide dog is actually a registered trademark. So just kind of, and there's etiquette around those. Like I could sit here and tell both great stories and horror stories. My favorite horror story very quickly is that going through the TSA in one particular airport, every time I took my guide through, they would ask me to do something ridiculous with the dog. One time it was, can you take the dog's leash off and hold them by the harness alone? Dog was going to slip out of that really fast, out of the fact he was well trained, because they thought there was metal. I'm like, it's a rigid harness. The entirety of the handle of the harness under the wrapped leather is metal. And the TSA agents' eyes just about bugged out of their head when I said that. Taking the leather leash off that only the clip is metal is not going to fix our metal detector problem. I've had them try to put me through the full body scanner with the dog and had a, so yeah, there's just a lot of different things about, and emotional support animals don't have to be public access trained. And it's there's just so much misinformation out there about this entire subject.
Great. Thanks, Laura. And you come back to travel again, right? Travel keeps coming up. And I think, not only is this topic great, it just reinforces the need to discuss travel and all that's involved with that. Mitchell.
Yeah, I agree with what Laura was talking about. The gigantic difference between service dog and emotional support animals. I've had a bad encounter with an emotional support animal. I would never touch a service dog or approach it. Unfortunately, I approached an emotional support dog, and it reflected the owner's temperament exactly.
Right. Thanks, Mitchell. All right, Mitchell, let's go ahead to the next topic.
Next topic from Dave Troutman in Edmonton, Canada, suggesting, can there be a discussion one day about the novel interface in Apple's Vision Pro and how it might help people with a disability?
Brendan?
I agree. I agree with that discussion and using that for, future discussion about cool tech and how we make it accessible. I think that's a great idea. I agree. We should definitely talk about that.
Okay. And Albert.
We talk about accessibility issues of new technologies, but I'm also, I think this question actually mentions the importance of talking about how new technologies can also improve accessibility in general, right? So I'd love to discuss about that. Thank you for the question.
Great. Thank you. And Mitchell, let's go ahead to the next topic.
Robert Sababity from Poland suggests, would it be worth having some workshops for producers and after hours on using the main conferencing platforms, Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, etc. In Europe, I run workshops for interpreter associations to help build skills and awareness, sign and simultaneous.
Great. Yeah. Thanks again, Robert, for another great idea. As I think all of the platforms are improving over time, I also feel like all of these platforms have room for improvement, right? There's, especially in regards to access and disabilities and languages, as you mentioned. So great topic. Brendan, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Sure. As a person who uses, this type of technology and still using today, absolutely, it's a very good subject to discuss. And really kind of, I think a lot of people kind of relate to that. And that's something we would want to talk about. As a deaf person, it's more difficult to access these types of platforms, obviously. So I think really if we could talk about like Zoom, I think it's getting better. I think it really depends on your perspective. But for other people, you have to figure out what's best for them and see what their perspectives are on what's the best way to approach it. So I agree. I think we definitely could talk about that.
Great. Thanks, Brendan. Mitchell, let's go ahead to the next topic.
Michael Koffer in New York suggests if there is a sign language interpreter that's not up to par, I would inform the agency not to send me that interpreter. They would ask me reasons. Is that appropriate for them to ask?
Brendan.
So it really is kind of up to the person. I think that if they're asking why, because they want to improve who they're selecting, that's a different thing. But at the same time, it could lead to other problems too. That's a good question. I think we can talk about that, definitely. I tend to not want to criticize the interpreter, but I think that, at the same time, they may want to ask why, because they want to know if they're trying to, if this is a good fit, because that interpreter that they selected may have not been a good fit for that particular situation. So I think it might be helpful to know that. So it really kind of depends.
Thanks, Brendan. Michael?
Okay, so yeah, obviously that was my question. It's my favorite question. I wrote it, obviously. But I work with interpreters every day, right? Every day. And so if you look at it from a different perspective, and that's kind of what I want to talk about, like from an agency perspective, there's lots of different things to consider when hiring an interpreter. For example, for bilingual agencies that handle lots and lots of different languages, not just sign language interpreters, right? So they may handle lots of different languages, and they make a lot of money doing that. They're just, providing interpreting services, and it's expensive. And so let's say, for example, I can't remember exactly. I want to say maybe it was like 50 to 100 different hours, 150 to 100 hours minimum. That aside. But if we're talking about bilingual agencies that provide multiple language services, Spanish, French, Korean, lots of different languages. So there's always a screening process. And let's say, for example, if a person's speaking Spanish and the interpreter's translating, and maybe they're not a good linguistic fit, obviously it wouldn't be a fit. They're not skilled enough. So we would have to go through lots of different interpreters. But for when agencies are hiring interpreters, bilingual agencies are hiring interpreters, I'm sorry, I should say that, or ASL, sign language interpreters, there's no real way for them to screen the interpreters. Oh, I see that you're credentialed as an interpreter, used, American Sign Language. Okay, you're certified. Okay, sounds good. And then they're hired, right? So there's no way for them to screen those interpreters. Certification is generally through Registry of Interpreters for the Deaf, RID registration. And you can become certified if you take an exam, but that's a minimally skilled interpreter, right? That means they meet the minimal requirements to be a sign language interpreter. So there are two different, skills that sign language interpreters are required to have. First is they have to be able to see sign language and then translate it into spoken English, right? The translation. So oftentimes the interpreter, for whatever reason, if it's a good interpreter or maybe not an appropriately behaved interpreter, will let the agency know, I really am not interested in working with this interpreter again. And they'll ask me, well, why is that? And so I always say, well, why do I need to explain my reasoning? I don't want to work with that interpreter. Again, it's my right to decline that interpreter. They should trust my opinion on that, or give me a form to fill out and let me give my feedback. I don't want to have to say all of that, because then if I'm going through lots of different agencies and lots of different interpreters, can become problematic. So that's just my 2 cents on that. I won't go on, but just some thoughts on that.
Great. Thanks, Michael. John, you wanted to comment on this as well?
I think as a topic, how to have difficult conversations around accessibility would be a great topic idea.
Excellent. Yeah, great way to put that. All right, Mitchell, let's go to the next topic.
And it's Paul Wallace, Austin, Texas, asking, will live speech using personal voice on Mac OS Sonoma work in a Zoom meeting for a person who no longer has their voice, but has preserved their former voice in personal voice?
All right, John.
That's a super specific way to approach this topic. I would go more general. How do you use live speech in creative ways?
Great. Good. Yeah, I think there's a couple of, current and approaching tech topics that have come up that sound like they would be great to cover. So, Mitchell, let's go to the next topic.
Albert Kim, Los Angeles, asking competition among minority groups and intersectionality.
And let's go to Albert Kim.
Yeah, basically the question that I'm trying to discuss is like, what are some of the biases that we might have? Even though I know that we say we advocate for disability inclusion, but I also know at the same time, there's intersectionality and there's many issues to diversity inclusion, not just accessibility. Are we aware of LGBTQ, for example, or are we aware of, or do I have maybe biases towards certain other minority groups? I'd love to talk about that topic, because oftentimes I see that there's a competition between different minority groups. And I don't think that's a really a good thing. So, discussing about that, also asking how do we accommodate conflicting needs? For example, if a low vision attendee needs a brighter screen, but somebody with photo sensitive epilepsy, it'll trigger their diagnosis, right? So when there's a brighter light, so how do you accommodate better? So I think I just want to talk about different intersectionalities.
Thanks, Albert. And there's a few more questions that we're going to leave for future conversations just for the sake of time, but we appreciate all of the questions. As always, the producers just really keep our show engaging and moving forward. So we appreciate that. We want to thank our interpreters today. That keeps the show, our deaf panelists and our audience members that are relying on sign language, which really appreciate you being here. Thanks to the crew for keeping this show moving along and keeping us looking great and the show sounding great. We just always appreciate everyone that's involved with the show. It's such a great audience, great crew, great producers. And just a little bit of trivia for the miles we've traveled today through our question session: 75,475 miles, over 121,000 kilometers. So a lot of distance, and we always appreciate your time joining us today. Please join us next Saturday as we carry on the accessibility topic for at least one more week, and we'll kind of let you know some of the plans. And of course, join office hours throughout the week, and keep in contact with all the topics that are going on there. So thank you very much, everybody.
Great job, guys. It's an honor.